the meeting itself, but I would love to see that later, what organization folks are from. And then after that, we'll dive into talking a little bit more about the emissions indicators, which ones in particular we have been calculating using this tool, and which ones are applicable to SERVIR and other programs. And then we will give an introduction to the AFOLU carbon calculator. In that we will provide a couple slides about the carbon calculator, but I will primarily be going into screen sharing what the interface looks like and describing some of the critical components. From there, we will then walk through an example of calculating impact from an activity from the WABiLED program. And then we have also made space to run a demonstration of an example from the SERVIR program. In this case, we have gathered some information based on communications over the past month or so. Thank you, Lori, for all the information you coordinated and provided to us. And we'll talk through how a program could use this information to then input that into the AFOLU carbon calculator. And then from there, we will wrap up, and I would love to have, more time spent on sort of questions and answers. So if folks have particular questions that they want to bring to the table and discuss, then I think that would be the time to do so, and we'd really welcome your input. So from there, I'm going to dive into the background on the greenhouse gas emissions. So the primary two performance indicators that the USAID-funded WABiLED project reports on related to greenhouse gas emissions reductions are EG 13-6, which is the greenhouse gas emissions estimated in metric tons of CO2 equivalent, reduced, sequestered, or avoided through sustainable landscape activities supported by U.S. government assistance. So in this case, the reduced, sequestered, or avoided indicates and points to the variety of activities that are implemented by the WABiLED project and by other projects in the region that could have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. For instance, the planting of a tree or plantations or natural regeneration could sequester existing CO2 within the atmosphere. Additionally, something such as forest protection, the enforcement of eco-patrols in a certain protected area, that could then avoid emissions from being produced in the first place by preventing logging or other maybe illegal activities within that landscape. We also have the indicator EG 13-7. In this case, this is projected greenhouse gas emissions, so it's a little bit more forward-looking into the future. In this case, it is the greenhouse gas emissions that are reduced or avoided through 2030, and this is as a result of adopted laws, policies, regulations, or technologies related to sustainable landscapes as supported by U.S. government assistance. So in this case, as opposed to EG 13-6, which is a bit more directly related to activities within the landscape and tying those to the emissions reductions. In this case, we're looking at a little bit more of a broader scale of the landscapes in which projects implement, and looking at the overarching laws and policies that are implemented, with the idea and vision that the implementation of these policies and their effect on the landscapes and the actors within it typically takes a little bit of time to start to sort of have an impact on greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So that's why that timeline is set out to 2030, and also why it is focused more on policies, regulations, sort of these initiatives coming from a more institutional level, as opposed to more specific activities being implemented by certain organizations. I also don't have it on the slide here, but I would like to point out, I know SERVIR, as well as several other programs, also reports on indicator EG 13-8. And so this performance indicator is the number of hectares under improved management expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a result of U.S. government assistance. So in this instance, I'm not including it here directly, as it's not, and the unit of measurement is not greenhouse gas emissions that are being reduced. However, the information gathering, which is required to use the AFOLU carbon calculator, would require that information be gathered around the number of hectares under improved management in order to, sum up these areas in hectares and be able to report this. So I would almost say that this is like a subset or an initial step before the two indicators that I have on the screen as a means of sort of, that initial information that is gathered, but can then be reported as that indicator. So we can revisit that in a further conversation. So next I'll provide just a little bit of background on the AFOLU carbon calculator. And then what I'll do is I'll start screen sharing the actual carbon calculator itself and provide a little bit of, clicking around on the interface and demonstrating some of the components of that tool. And I think also what I want to highlight is that some of the things that we have discussed in prior SERVIR land use task force meetings is that there are, a couple of flaws and criticisms that we may have of the carbon calculator, and that there is currently a new project in place to update the current carbon calculator. So I will discuss a little bit of the history of that. So here, what I have on screen is I'm demonstrating the carbon calculator tools that exist under the AFOLU carbon calculator. So just to take a step back, the AFOLU carbon calculator, AFOLU is standing for agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And so typically with the AFOLU carbon calculator, the impacts that we're measuring are primarily related to the landscapes and land-based activities themselves. So that is shown in the image on the right, where we have the different categories that fall under this tool. In this case, forest protection, forest management, those going hand in hand. We also have afforestation or reforestation, so the planting of trees and growth of those trees. Agroforestry, so creating these like intercropped systems, or there are many different modes of that. Cropland management and grazing management. Also, monitoring pastoral lifestyles. And then lastly, fuel, wood, and charcoal efficiency. So that being in more landscapes where logging occurs in order to create charcoal kilns. So all of these categories are the ones that were identified by Windrock, who initially created the AFOLU carbon calculator in 2014. These were determined to be the main categories across which most USAID activities were, acting within this landscape, and so they were able to capture the impact of those activities through these. And then I would say the idea too of this tool is, being able to measure the impact of this broad range of agriculture and forestry related activities, but they wanted to make it really user friendly. So I think that that's something that we'll definitely be able to see as we start to look through the interface of the AFOLU carbon calculator, is that the idea was to try to really put in some default values, make it really user friendly, and then also, only have those basic user inputs to then be able to have a number that could be reported on that, is still based in sound evidence. So while this is definitely, I think, a good initiative, a good thought to move forward with, I will also note that because the carbon calculator was created in 2014, some of the information that is being pulled from in cases such as the existing biomass in an area or maybe occurrences of fires, that information is now a decade old, and so in areas certainly that can also present a problem, as that outdated information and data sets from 10 years ago are now presenting a reality that no longer exists within these landscapes. And so the update of this information is something that I know USAID is prioritizing, but I would also say that is something that folks should definitely be cognizant of when using this tool, is which tools are using that outdated information, but then also, going back to the methodology, as we know that there are other instances where, for instance, with the Afforestation, Reforestation categories, that there are forest growth models that those are based on that, haven't aged per se, because those are based on academic research that has been developed and built on over many decades. And so it's really a question of digging into each of the tools and seeing, does this one have information that I would want to update, or is the methodology still sound based on our current understanding? And then the last point that I will make about the carbon calculator is, as much as it tries to be user friendly, with a healthy dose of criticism, I think we have seen in our own practice that sometimes there's a lack of transparency when interpreting the results of the carbon calculator. It can sometimes spit out certain values regarding the impact of the implementation of certain activities, and it's a little bit hard to trace that back to where those numbers are coming from, and what the exact equations are that led to that result. So as much as I would say the methodologies are definitely still on, and we've dug into and looked at those, making that jump from basic user inputs to interpretation of results can sometimes be difficult depending on the expertise of the user of the tool itself. I did see in the chat that John may have been having trouble joining the meeting, so hopefully he's able to join soon. I would love to get his additional input on some of this. But
I guess,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am. Just when you get to where I have to intervene, just let me know.
Yeah, certainly. And John, would you like to provide an introduction to everyone?
Okay. Hi everyone. I'm John von Weban. I'm the working with WABiLED project as the RED Plus Low Emission Development Strategy Specialist.
Great, thank you, John. And yes, I'll pass over to Darlington or John when the section comes up.
Darlington is not on seat. Oh.
You have a pseudonym today. Okay, well, great. Yeah, so to just jump back into the presentation briefly. So this is just an overview of the carbon calculator. But what we thought would be really helpful in this instance was, screen sharing the actual tool itself and being able to walk through some of the components that are present there. So let me pull that up. Are you all seeing that on my screen? Okay, great. So what I've pulled up here is the initial dashboard for the AFOLU carbon calculator. So as we see, developed by Winrock and USAID in conjunction. And in order to access this site initially, we have to create a user login. So in this case, you're seeing my account here, as well as the projects that I have on my dashboard. If there's any difficulty in logging in initially, you can definitely let us know. But also, I would say that once creating an account, which is sort of that first step, they're around where to start and where to start inputting information to calculate impact. So you can use this where to start section and show year round, or also listen to this webinar, which we will be doing sort of some of the same things. The other thing I want to point out here is that every project that you're working on, you can create a separate project within that. And then, for instance, if I were to click on here, our most recent WABiLED reporting project, we then have an overview that has a description, the total benefits that are being reported across those. And then we also have the activities that fall under each of these, the activities that fall under this project. So I'll briefly just go back to the project overview. And what I'd like to point out here is that what is great is that in order to provide that documentation for when reporting the actual numbers that are being calculated using this tool, this preview report button provides a PDF that then sort of spits out the summary of all of the information, as well as the numbers generated as a result of that. So I have an example of one here. This was when I just opened that annual reporting project yesterday, and it has that project summary, and then it has each of the activities listed out. So these being the different landscapes that we'll dive into, also the IDs of our activities, which I will describe in depth more later. And then for each of the activity names, providing those project benefits over the certain timeline. So this information is then echoed when you go through each of the activities. So in this instance, maybe what we have here is one of our activities, which we've given an ID of 37. This, when you open it, it shows the activity type, the year in which it was started, and then also those locations across which the activity operates. So what I will point out, if we go back to, apologies, if we go back to this view, we see here that there are these geographies that are associated with each of the activities. And so what you'll notice is that there's a country and then there's an administrative division. So that being the subnational administrative division that is one below the country. And so the reason that these 5 are included in here is that the landscape that we have associated with this project, with this activity, spans all the area within these administrative boundaries is included in activity, but that in this instance, I believe this is the Gola landscape that ID 37 is working across, spans the area in Liberia and Sierra Leone that covers these administrative boundaries. So when we are creating a new activity, so for instance, if I edit this existing one, I can edit the locations here. And what I will demonstrate is what we've done here is we've inputted this broader boundary we have to the Gola FOIA transboundary landscape that WABiLED operates in. And so What this does is you're able to take a shapefile, input that, having it as a zip file. So that's something that I can walk through if folks desire that. But making sure that you have that spatial data for the activities that you're working in can be really helpful in calculating this, as when I put the shapefile in, it automatically will tell me the total area, or I could calculate that separately and input it as a custom input. And I also that location editing does is that it takes the subnational units that each of the components of this falls into, and it gives a ratio of how much overlap there is. So within this entire landscape that we've uploaded for this activity, what percentage of that falls into each of the subnational administrative boundaries in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And what this helps do is that in instances where there are certain biomass values or other calculated values that are summarized across the subnational administrative boundaries, they take those values and based on the ratio, that is how much that sort of influences the average value that then is inputted into the equations for this specific activity. So, for instance, Sierra Leone in the eastern region, this is going to have more of an impact. This, biomass value or other inputted metric is going to have more of an impact than the rest of the subnational administration's values on the calculations, because there is a large area of overlap there in terms of where the area of activity falls. So this is just a brief overview of how shapefiles and geographic location is handled by the AFOLU calculator. I'm happy to talk about that more if there are specific questions on that. And then additionally, this is where you can manage those shapefiles. So in this case, they're called parcels. And here we have across a couple different projects have uploaded several different examples in different landscapes that the WABiLED project operates within. So if I go back to the project that we were looking at, we can then look into each of the activities as I was doing. And so the benefits here, when we click on each activity, is showing us across the different years, across each of the subsequent years, what is the effectiveness rating, which is something we'll talk about in a bit. And then it gets into the total annual benefit and then accumulated benefit, so that being the addition of all of the annual benefits up until that point. And so I guess the question that we have here at this sort of point is, how is this number calculated? So in order to start this discussion, I just want to quickly demonstrate. So in this case, we have an activity that is forest protection. And so when we go down here into the editing activity section, we see that there are a number of inputs that we are required to put into the tool in order to determine impact. So these are the specific information that you would need to gather based on what activity type there is. So for WABiLED, we do have a lot of forest protection activities, in which case we are looking to really avoid greenhouse gas emissions from being emitted. And so we have to determine the type of forest, the avoided action, and the effectiveness of that activity, which again, John will help us in talking about a bit later. And then there are a lot of these default values regarding the different activities within the landscape. So to take a step back, to determine the information that we need to gather before we start working in the AFOLU carbon calculator, now that we kind of have familiarity with it, I just wanted to demonstrate what we did with the WABiLED project in really gathering the information that's needed, and also taking all of our activities and making sure that the ones that are impacting these indicators specifically are being counted, and the ones that aren't are not. So what I'm showing on the screen, and I'll zoom in a bit to hopefully make that easier for folks to see, is we have here a progress tracking activity sheet. So in this instance, we have taken every single activity that would potentially impact these indicators, every single activity across the project, across different subcomponents, and we've given it its own line item. And we've also assigned an ID to that so that we can then tie that activity from the information in this spreadsheet to then include that in the AFOLU carbon calculator itself. We have also, in our case, have landscapes and sub-landscapes that we need to designate those into. And then additionally, many of these activities are implemented by grantees. And so being able to have that accountability of who is doing what is really important. So the information gathered would, in this case, that overall information would definitely depend on the project. But then I think where we really get into the impact of the activities is where we start to look at impact. And so here we have it on emissions or biodiversity as their indicators in the WABiLED project that are also related to biodiversity. But what we mostly want to see here is it related to indicator 1 or 12? And so that being the EG 13-6 or 13-7. And what we did was we went through all of the proposals and then ultimately the quarterly reports and other information from grantees or from colleagues within the project itself, and tried to gather specific quotations related to why we categorized a certain activity related to a certain indicator. So we have a description of the activity here, and then in digging through the documentation of the AFOLU carbon calculator, we really wanted to designate, is this activity, or rather, why is this activity related to this specific indicator? So in the case of here, this establishing or strengthening protection of forested areas is included in the AFOLU policy tool. And so in this case, we were training administrative agents and community involved in the implementation of the corridor. And so that training and strengthening of the protection of forested areas is what led us to put that under our indicator 1. We then also needed to get a sense of what is the area across which this activity is being implemented. And in this instance, we're just using a broader value based on the transboundary landscape, the sort of larger transboundary landscape that we have for that specific region. And then we have effectiveness rating. So our year 1 activities were still being started up for some of the grantees. And so year 2 is when we start to see actual effectiveness rating values. And so with that, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. And I'm going to pass it over to John to talk a little bit more about what effectiveness ratings are. John, are you able to unmute and either from Darlington's computer or your own?
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I had serious problems joining. Yeah. So I will just talk a bit about effectiveness ratings, and this is probably one of the first questions that you are asked when you start to run the AFOLU tool. The first question is, uh, what is the effectiveness rating? So it could be for any of the activities that Jess has just described, whether forest protection, forest management, afforestation, reforestation, agroforestry, or crop management. You need to get that effectiveness rating, um, because this goes into the calculations at the background of the tool, just like the deforestation rate and the other values, the other default values that Jess just indicated. They have to be, this has to be done. And so it gives at least it's something like an efficiency of the implementation of that project. And it tries to scale that, it scales the activity such that you don't get, let's say, some abnormal values when doing the calculations. So it assumes that for each activity, you have a particular profile, like probably a curve in terms of carbon sequestration. It has a curve, which after giving that effectiveness rating, it places the activity on that, and then it starts doing the projections that just indicated over time. So, as I said, for all the major activities, you must give that a effectiveness rating. There is usually a questionnaire that you need to go through by clicking one of the buttons in the tool. You go through that questionnaire. And if I take the example of the afforestation, reforestation, or agroforestry, I've taken this example because from what we found with the SERVIR project, there is potential that the farmer manage natural regeneration is an agroforestry activity. So we've just taken that as an example. So the first thing that you are requested is that effectiveness rating. Presenting, you must see there's a button. You click on that guide, and then it opens a sample questionnaire, which is what I'm showing on the screen now. The first question is, how would the project tree planting, because it's an agroforestry or afforestation activity, be best described? Now, there are two ways. It could be a small scale or a large scale type of commercial activity. For example, if you're dealing with oil palm, with cocoa, rubber, those are what you call commercial activities or large scale activities. But sometimes you might be dealing with small scale or small scale farmers and small scale holders. So the questions will now branch. There will be a branch depending on the answer you give. If it is a large scale activity, then the program branches to question 2. So if it's small scale, it goes to question 3, questions follow. So suppose if we take the example of the farmer manage natural regeneration, should be definitely small scale type of activities. So you won't be asked any question on question 2 wouldn't be useful there, because that question 2 applies to large scale activities. Now, if we had to continue with the small scale, assuming small scale, which is so we'll go now to question 3. It will then ask you for if in terms of small scale, maybe these are farmers. The question will be whether these farmers receive technical support. It could be in terms of training, in terms of other inputs into the work they are doing. So it will be the implementer that will be know whether they are training the smallholders, whether they are providing some modern implements for them. So it will just be a yes or no type of question. And then depending on whether it's yes or no, there will be a quoting. If it is a no, normally some percentage subtraction is done. If it is a yes, then another quote is given. Now, you go to question 4, where the conditions, climatic conditions, are also indicated, required. Now, the climate conditions could be stated as optimal, could be suboptimal, or could be poor condition. So, depending on the information you have. For example, information on the climate, you probably know where you are working, the area you are working, and you'll be able to, say whether the land is very poor in terms of maybe it is harsh with the weather is very harsh in the area or things like that. Then the fifth question will be on whether you are using organic manure, or you are actually using mineral fertilizer and things like that. Those type of questions will also have an implication on the effectiveness rating. Now, if the people who are going to manage this plantation, for example, will they have received adequate training and capacity building? Again, it is really related to question 3. You will know whether you are going to provide, or you've provided a lot of training to these people, or they are not. You'll be required to know whether they have training manuals that they can use even after the project or not. So once you've gone through the 6 questions, once you finish answering the 6 questions, the program automatically comes up with an effectiveness rating. It will indicate that based on your answers you've provided, the effectiveness rating for this activity is it's rated from 0 to 100. So it could be 70%, it could be 80, and so on. So you also saw how Jess indicated on one of the columns on the table, the effectiveness rating. So it's after that. So this is just an example of the which we did. We did for one of the activities which Jess has indicated. So you see there, the questions are the activities described as large scale or commercial. There were small scale, so we just said small scale. Do the people receive adequate technical support? Yes. Is the climate described as optimum, suboptimum, or poor? Optimal. Will fertilizer or irrigation be applied? In this case, there was no irrigation or fertilizer application. Will the plantations be managed by people who are adequately trained? Yes, because capacity building will be provided. Now, when you finish that, the next thing is the program gives you, it says that based on the answers provided, it is estimated that the project will be 90% effective in reducing emissions compared to the project that was optimally designed. So it tries to indicate to you where there was some reduction in deductions in the effectiveness ratings and so on. So this is how we come out. So in this case, we came out with the effectiveness rating of 90%. probably from the beginning of the project, the effectiveness rating will not be high, but it is assumed that with time, as activities go on, it continues to increase. So this is the beginning. This is a doorway to the use of the AFOLU tool. You need to have this information. Now, after getting this information, you might, in some cases, you might use some cases because of certain things, because sometimes the deductions are like 20% or 10% or things like that. So it could be, you could also use your initiative to say, well, because this activity, yeah, they are doing this, but not really well. You could gauge that and probably modify this effectiveness rating. But if you just want to keep it on this question, then this is what you will have. This is what you're going to insert in the AFOLU tool and that area where they're asking for effectiveness rating. Okay, I think we might, if there are questions, then we might answer the questions at the end. Jess, back to you, over to you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so what I thought would be helpful at this point is if we took a specific activity from the activity spreadsheet that I was showing, and I'll walk through within that spreadsheet, what is the information that we gathered, and then what we'll do is we'll just jump over to the AFOLU calculator where we have that information inputted, and we can look through the different information that we had needed. And so I'll pull that up right now, but the reason we specifically were thinking about activity 3 and activity 6, which we have grouped into activity 3-6, is because that this is a forest restoration activity that WABiLED is working on. And so given that we know SERVIR under some of the ecosystem service area work has been doing natural regeneration activities, and we figured that this would be perhaps the closest to that activity in terms of the type of impact that's measured, and then from there the information that is needed to be gathered. And so as I noted, activities 3 and activities 6 were grouped together. And so I hadn't mentioned this before, but each activity we have here is given its own line item and given its own activity ID. However, when we go to calculate the impact of that activity, we note that in this instance, these are both activities that are being implemented by CSRS in the corridor between Tai and Great Cron national parks. And so in this instance, the livelihood activity here in activity 3 and the forest restoration activity in activity 6, we determined were going to be implemented in the same area and thus would have overlapping impact. And so by doing this, we're trying to sort of prevent this case of double counting in which each activity is given its own impact and we're over-reporting the emissions reduced. And just acknowledging here that there are like synergies across the different activities that are being implemented. So in other cases throughout the WABiLED activities, different grantees that are working on similar activities in the same landscapes have activity IDs that are grouped together. And then that is, I'll show you that within the AFOLU calculator, we're calculating the impact of activities 3 and 6 altogether at once. So as we go along here within the columns, we have a couple of other points of information I want to note. So here we have the ID that we're grouping the values with, but then also, as a note, we are not sharing it here within this webinar, but some of our forest protection activities under the WABiLED project, we are calculating using Google Earth Engine. And so the reason we're not sharing that today is just acknowledging that the SERVIR activities, in many cases, it didn't appear to fall under the forest protection category. So if folks are from other organizations and are interested in us sort of talking through that. Happy to talk about that further off this call. But in this instance, we were categorizing is the activity going to be calculated in the AFOLU calculator, or is it going to be calculated in Google Earth Engine? So in this case, we're able to then filter the information and choose only those activities that are going to be calculated using the AFOLU carbon calculator. And then I will also note here, if we go back to our area covered and our effectiveness rating, so we note that the livelihood activities are going to be completed over an area of 20 hectares, and then our forest restoration has this value just under 200 hectares, across which the nurseries are being established, in which forest restoration is occurring. So we add these two up, and this is going to be our area covered for the activity. And then additionally, as John had talked through here, we have an effectiveness rating for each of the years. And so in a lot of cases, the effectiveness ratings within the tool assumes that effectiveness is going to increase over time, such that the values would go maybe from 70% effective to 100%, but that is not always the case, and so that's just something to be aware of, is that as you calculate those and go through the questionnaire each year based on the new information that is gathered from that year of implementation, to just be cognizant of how that's going to impact the effectiveness rating. And then, as John has noted and was on the slide, this value is going to take the total impact that we do calculate from these activities, and it's going to scale that. So in the case of 100% effective, the impact that we're going to calculate is just going to remain the same. But for instance, in the first year when we were only 70% effective, once we calculate that value, the tool is going to then multiply that by the value of 0.7, thereby sort of reducing the impact of the activity itself, because that effectiveness is not at 100% just yet. So that is also something to be aware of, is how this number is used to sort of scale the values that are being gathered after the fact. So now that we have our activity grouping of 3 and activity 6, I will jump back to the AFOLU calculator. So that's the Thai River Prawn Sapo transboundary landscape that WABiLED operates in. That covers administrative boundaries both of ours here, that our total area being that the sum of those two values that I showed within the spreadsheet. So around 217 hectares. And then also, I will say that we started in earnest many of the forestry or nursery activities and growth of those plants within that in 2023. So that's our year of start here. And then if we go to edit this activity, what you'll see is that under the required inputs, we have what John was talking about. This is our effectiveness rating, or effective percent. So in this case, it is 100%, as this is something that John had calculated for this current year of implementation. As he noted, you can also override this value and provide your own effectiveness percentage if you feel that maybe some of the questions are displaying the information incorrectly regarding how you would calculate the effectiveness of your activity. And then I would probably provide a justification for that, just so that there's documentation of why you provided that value. However, a great way to do that is to do, as John had said, going through this effectiveness guide. So maybe if I say, yes, it's a policy initiative, yes, there is institutional capacity to implement this policy, maybe there's 50% fundings allocated to its implementation, and no, land managers aren't going to face insurmountable financial hurdles. Yes, there's adequate enforcement. And then it says that based on these answers, it would be 100% effective in reducing emissions compared to the project that was optimally designed. So this is just demonstrates how when you walk through each of those steps, the information that you're gathering along the way is sometimes going to depend on what the questions that are being asked in this effectiveness rating section. So I think another thing to note here is that having that communication with the folks who are on the ground implementing, if you're not the one who directly has that information, is important during the reporting period, making sure that those communication channels are open so that this information can then filter down to adequately be used to measure impact using this tool. So then what John had also noted here is that within our afforestation, reforestation activity type, the required inputs that we have to put in is the species type. And so in this case, we had a natural regeneration activity, and so we just chose that natural forest. And so natural forest here will then take default values for these administrative boundaries to include within the calculations. However, if you were planting a plantation, we know that there's only tropical moist wet within this specific region, so this would update depending on the geographies that you inputted into your locations here. We then would have to choose what is the species that is being planted in these areas. So if you have a specific species of tree that is being planted in a plantation for your project, then in that case, we know that there are different growth rates and growth curves based on different species within these plantations. And so the selection of these helps really narrow down whether or not, or based on how fast, that plantation is going to grow. And then also as a result of how fast it is growing, what is the accumulation of carbon, how much is being sequestered across each of the years of growth of the trees within this plantation. So this is just something to be aware of as well if you're going to be measuring the impact of afforestation or reforestation activities, is to make sure that you have that species information in order to correctly calculate the growth there. So I'll note here, so we just did natural forest as in this case, we are doing natural regeneration activities within the region. And so that is just taking an average growth curve across the regional species that are present in the geographies we provided. And then the last two inputs that are not required that you change them. This kind of goes back to that basic user inputs note that I had made about the tool within the PowerPoint side, is that the advanced inputs allows you to edit some of the behind the scenes calculations that are going on, but in many cases you can leave these blank if you feel that the default values are adequate. So here the carbon accumulation rate is the rate at which carbon accumulates in the planted trees. So this is based on the species type that you have selected within the required input section. And the default value is based on a growth curve for the species selected. So as I noted, different species are going to have different growth curves based on academic research. And so if you feel that maybe the options that you would like to select are not represented within these, or you find that the carbon accumulation rate, perhaps due to some data collection, is not represented by the default value, then the tons of carbon per hectare that is gathered, accumulated per year, could then be inputted into this advanced input section. And then additionally, you can change the age of the plantation to then indicate at which step along the growth of these plants you are at in terms of the years of growth. And then what I think is really important here is that you should put some notes down as to why you made certain selections. So again, coming back to that documentation piece, I think noting why each of these values is the way it is can be important if you're then returning to this a year later to update reporting, or being passed on to a follow-on project, or being passed on to colleagues who are going to be doing similar work. Just having that documentation is really important. So alongside all of the information that's inputted here and the notes that we have, which are captured in that PDF that we outputted at the beginning, we also like to go through the guide here, this effectiveness rating, and then as John had shown on the slides, we take a screenshot of what the questions were that were asked and what the justification from the tool is as to why we received a certain effectiveness rating. And again, so just keeping track of that across the years. And then also, as I had shown in that activity spreadsheet, having that information in multiple places, so having that in the activity spreadsheet, then also helps us see how that effectiveness rating has changed over the years. So then the last thing I would like to show here is that if we go to our main activity page and we scroll down to our benefits information here, then we can see here is the total annual benefit. And so that information is based on the forest growth curve based on the specific species that we selected. Growth based on the area that we provided, so that hectare value of just under 200 hectares. That will then factor into what the total annual benefit is on the growth curve. And then from there, that sums into our cumulative benefit. So this is tons of carbon dioxide. So this also is something that we like to document and just keep track of, is what these growth curves are showing us in terms of growth. So as we see here, there are a lot of gains in the first couple of years as trees are very rapidly growing. And then as we start to get out into, several decades from now, some of that growth can kind of slow down as trees start to mature and have done the majority of the sequestration that they will do within their lifetime. So this is just something to note, but I think in a lot of cases, we're reporting over this small time scale. So you can typically stick with some of the values in the first couple of years, depending on what year you are reporting for. And then I think before I jump into maybe talking about some of these surveyor activities and how they might be reported within this tool, I just want to note that once you are in the AFOLU carbon calculator, if you go up to this info button, there's a lot of methods and sources that are behind the calculation of these values. So, as I noted before, we have our own sort of thoughts on some of this information being outdated, but also some of it not, in terms of, the growth curves that are present for some of this reforestation activities. That's information that is coming from academic literature, and in many cases is still scientifically sound. So what's really good is to go through the methods and sources to see, is there a specific point in which this information is being gathered or calculated that, I agree with or disagree with based on what our current understanding is. So what we had done here, and I'll just show a couple examples of some of the documentation. So we have here one of the presentations that has the information about the carbon calculator and how land use is related to carbon emissions, and then additionally some background on what activity data is being used to then get this emission or removal factor, which is the basic approach that is used for the calculations in many of these cases. So we can definitely share the documentation around this. A lot of it is based in the IPCC research that has been conducted. And then also there's documentation around each of the tools. So digging into each of those categories that we had shown on that initial slide regarding what tools should be used and what's an example of some of the activities that fall under that. And another thing that we've pulled out of one of these presentations is what is applicable to the tool and what is not. So another reason that we thought it was really important to go through each of our activities within the list that we had gathered is making sure that none of them fall under, the not applicable to the tool, but are then being calculated in the tool. So if there is something like environmental education going on, but that's not directly impacting the emissions reductions, then we don't want to calculate that. So in a lot of cases, this can be a really helpful table to look through. Again, we can also provide that after the fact. And then I believe I have here just an introduction to the AFOLU calculator as well. So, we're happy to answer any questions as users of the tool, but I also just want to note that the creators of the tools themselves, have a lot of documentation and a lot of sort of their logic documented behind each of the tools, as well as the different methodologies that were used in each of those sections. So just noting that we are simply users of the tool, trying to share knowledge, trying to get folks to use it, but also have a critical eye in doing so, and that the creators of the tools themselves are ultimately accountable for the documentation and information behind this. So then the last thing I will do is I'll jump over to the example that we got from folks on the SERVIR team. So when we were in communication with Gloria and others, thank you so much for the information that you all provided. We noted that SERVIR works in a vast amount of service areas, but that not all of those service areas, I think, would be applicable to these indicators and then applicable to the AFOLU carbon calculator. So some may need to be calculated in other manners, but I think that this for the land-based activities would be most adequate. And so the category, the service area, LUE being the ecosystem and carbon management systems from SERVIR, we thought that would be the most relevant to the use of the AFOLU carbon calculator, and that our demonstration of the reforestation activities that WABiLED used the tool to calculate the impact of would correlate most strongly with this category. And then the other thing we just wanted to note in going through some of the service areas for SERVIR, and I think is true of other projects, is that we just want to make sure that that those activities are directly attributable to the project. So if the impact of those activities is being reported on by another institution or is directly owned by another institution, just making sure that attribution question is answered and the direct funding is provided under the program, so that that information is not being double counted in any place, and that attribution is present. So the primary activity that we thought applied across the many that are included is the farmer managed natural regeneration that has occurred. So I just have a small blurb here provided from some of our SERVIR colleagues regarding some of the further information on what is being implemented in this activity. And so maybe what we were hoping to do is that if folks have more information they want to provide or want to jump online, then we could kind of walk through this activity and how we might put it into the AFOLU carbon calculator. We're also happy to sort of answer any questions before we maybe dive into this activity, or just focus on a more general Q&A. So I'll leave this up quickly, but I will just say, we just want to say thank you for having us. This has been a really great webinar, and so I'll just jump back to the SERVIR activities for now. and open up the floor if there are any folks who want to provide information or ask any questions. And I'll start to check the chat too. I know that there was some activity, but I wasn't able to keep up with all of that. But thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you very much for having the time to also speak with us. We really appreciate this. So we're opening it up now for questions or comments on this before we go on to other things. Just unmute and speak up. Go ahead, please, speak up.
Yeah, I don't have really question, but I have some suggestion. We need to have the PowerPoint presentation document, and if some document also can help us also to understand more the calculator, a full calculator that can be helpful to share with the participant. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Musa. Musa, go ahead. Unmute.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you everyone for participating on this. So my question is that since we are planning to have a practical training in Ghana on this activity, it can be a follow-up on this. So as mentioned by this, we have FMNR service, but also I wanted to know if the...
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. That's a really good question. And I know I touched on that previously. So I'll provide a little explanation, but John, I also see your hand up. So would definitely welcome your input as well. But I think the main distinction that we wanted to make here is that it depends on what methodology is being used across the different tools under the calculator. So I went back to the slide that you were referring to, and we have here the 7 tools that fall under that. And so in the case of the one that we were demonstrating, the Afforestation, Reforestation, the calculation, the main calculation of the increased impact over the many years of the implementation of an activity is based on forest growth curves. So that goes back to the question of what species is being planted, and as a result, what is the rate of sequestration over each of the subsequent years. So in that case, the information gathered is going to be based on information from 2014 and prior. But in many cases, with specific species, their information, there hasn't been new research that is changing these forest growth curves in the past decade. If there has been new information, then that would not be captured in the tool, and that's something that we'd want to address, but I think would be on a case-by-case basis of, what is the current research out there, and has it changed in the time period in which the carbon calculator was initially put out. But then to go back to maybe forest protection, which WABiLED has a number of activities that fall under this tool category. In order to determine avoided deforestation, we're using deforestation rates that are from 2014 and earlier. And we know that deforestation rates have changed drastically over the past decade in many regions. And so using that outdated deforestation rate to then extrapolate into the future would no longer, work for the calculation of the impact here. So in that case, for forest protection, that was where we decided that we wanted to pull this calculation into Google Earth Engine and update that information because we had more up-to-date deforestation rates that would then make that extrapolation more accurate. But I think all of this is just important to keep in mind is, what is the method that is being used under each of these tools, and then whether or not that information being outdated is critical to the soundness of the findings or not. And then the last thing I will note before I pass to John is that USAID has put out a requisition for updating the AFOLU carbon calculator. I believe EcoDit won that a year or two ago and is currently in development of a new tool. So there is the potential for a new tool or potentially a substitute with more updated information to come out sometime under that project. But that is something that we're closely monitoring as well. So just a couple of updates there. But I'll pass to John, please.
Okay, thank you for what I would just what I will add to what Jess has just said is that the logic behind the tool is sound. It's based on forestry science, silviculture, growth and yield modeling. So the logic behind is very sound. The problem that Jess also indicated is the rigidity in terms of areas. It works using regional district maps and so on. So it just cuts a district. But you know that with the modern technology now in the GE tool, in the Google Earth engine and so on, you have a lot of ways that you can actually get into a particular area. You can zoom into a particular area and just work with that. So with that rigidity, it has a problem. When Jess was presenting, she showed the natural forest. If you had to do things on natural forest, that area, she was trying to look at the species. And if you were careful, you see there that there are just a few species. You probably didn't see some of the species that you would imagine in West Africa. You only saw mahogany, which is a whole family. So those are some of the issues there that you might not have the information about the species that you want. In the case of SERVIR and the farmer managed natural regeneration, this would be, if you were working in that area, you would probably be in the dry tropical area or savanna. In those areas, you have that advantage, and I wanted to ask a question: which species are being used in the regeneration project there? But I would think that acacias are what is being probably used there. If you look at some of the documentation, you will find out that most of the acacias have information on the growth rates. The growth rates and the modeled and the projections that you see are based on Chairman Richard's model, group model. And you actually have information for Acacia nilotica, Senegal, Acacia Seychelles, and for all acacia. So for that area, you can actually get the information. So there's a good logic behind the whole thing. But there are certain things like the rigidity in terms of areas when working with areas and so on that bring a lot of problems. So that's just what I wanted to add. So the logic is correct. The logic behind it is correct. But if you have the possibility is also there for you to actually insert the values. For example, in terms of deforestation rates, you can actually, if you have a knowledge of the deforestation rate, the current deforestation rate, you can actually insert it into the program and it will provide you with the values. So there's that flexibility there. In fact, what has been done is that in the GE tool, if unfortunately we didn't have an example for the GE tool, you will find out that most of the programming, what is at the background, the AFOLU tool has been programmed on the GE tool, and it's so transparent that with the script, you can modify the script the way you want. So this is one of the problems that Jess indicated has not been transparent. But on the GE tool, it's quite transparent, quite flexible. So you can actually see the results. You can do that yourself and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. I therefore will request that while you are sending out the slides, please also include a link to the GE tool so that we also have access to that. Thank you. Are there other questions? So I take it as no further questions. Okay, go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
Really, I have to ask the question. Well, but it's not it's because when, just as I said, we went through the activities that SERVIR is undertaking, and I had a few questions on the charcoal production monitoring, because the charcoal production work, charcoal activities is regarded as degradation, forest degradation. If you don't remove, you don't get all the species away. So my question was, are Arusha and Solidaridad are working, as I saw on with probably with the people doing the charcoal. What activities are they undertaking? Are they doing anything to restore those areas that have been degraded? And if they are doing such activities, that those are the type of things that will capture CO2, sequester CO2, and there are some of the things that we would have loved to know. And those are the areas that SERVIR would also want to use to calculate emissions. The same thing with the mining, the Galamsey. The Galamsey program, if it is in a large area, it will be considered as deforestation, but maybe small chunks of areas might be degradation. But now, again, is there an option, because I saw that there are some remediation and restoration activities, again, erosion. My question again is, what activities are they undertaking? Because this could also be a way to sequester carbon, and those are the type of activities that we want. As Jess was presenting, you must have seen that we had a series of activities by our grantees. So these are the type of activities that we went through, analyzed them, and saw those ones that will lead to emission reduction and came out with that. So I definitely think that there are a number of things within the SERVIR project that could actually, if we go very a bit deeper, we could come out with some of those things, like the table that we had for this project. There was an indicator, indicator EG 13/-8, that's indicator 7, which talks about the number of hectares under improved management expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as a result of USG assistance. Now, here, it means that if you have some areas that are being improved upon in terms of management, and this is leading to reduced emissions, it means that we can actually work on that to get the emissions. There you've indicated a number of things. There should be institutions, ICTL, service, and room applications. While you talk about ICRISAT, which it's about the farmer managed regeneration we are talking about, charcoal, galamsey, and so on. So that means to me, I think, looking at that and then the activities, I think there's something that could be grasped from that area that will be useful in calculating some emissions. So that is a question, a comment that I wanted to just put over to you. Because if we had details about what is happening there, we'll be able to indicate whether this leads to emissions or not, and we'll be able to probably see how we can, the type of information that we need in order to use the tool, either the AFOLU tool or the GE tool or a hybrid. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I don't know if Bash is in this call. I saw him before. I don't know if he's still there. Bash, are you there? Now, if Bash is not there, can any other person able to answer? I see a number of you, but is there any other person who can answer this question that John has asked?
Yes, please, Glory.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, but I think there's a hand from Phoebe.
Yes, I was going to call you and Phoebe after someone answer his question. But otherwise, okay.
So I will just answer to John's question. The answer is yes, because we went to the field for the annual survey. So actually, they are in the charcoal. Arosha is helping people to planting tree where the charcoal, where the tree was cut. So we have the number of those, the total hectare under this initiative. And for Galamsey also, we have the Ghana National Mining Association, which is also undertaking the land reclamation activity. And after reclaiming the land, they planted some trees. We actually have the hectare under this activity, as well as the common level development service from Burkina Faso. So that's why we are suggesting at least those four services, including the FMNR one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification, Musa. So, Phoebe, please.
Sorry, I wanted to just add that for the Galamsey one, I think there is a separate funded program that is supporting the reclamation of the mines that could be considered. There's also interest from Erocha in also the same area. But the question I had in regards to the AFOLU calculator was to get to understand from a project point of view, like the calculation, are they done at the beginning and then updated towards the end, or is there like a recommended period where you provide updates based on, you know, the growth of the forest or new data that has come in?
Thank you, Phoebe. So, Jess, John, whoever.
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe, for the question. So I think what I had demonstrated on the screen with the tool itself was that for our project, we have the annual reporting requirements. And so what we have here is that each year we create a copy of that project and then we update the information therein. So we have a record of the previous year's reporting and then the next year's reporting. And so I think what you sort of touched on in your question is that new information comes in about the implementation of an activity across the course of a year. And so it's really important to capture that information within the new annual reporting period. So that is especially true for us when we initially set up the activity spreadsheet. A lot of the information that we are gathering about each of the activities was present within the proposals from the grantees. However, across the actual implementation of those grantee activities, some of the stuff from the proposal was removed and some of new stuff was added, you know, according to the specific needs of that activity. So incorporating that new information into the calculation of the effectiveness rating, and then also maybe adjusting what the area is that is used within those like location, geographic components of reporting. Updating all of that information is important year to year to then calculate the new impact that you would be reporting for that current year's annual reporting. So I hope I touched on the questions that you had about that. But yeah, updating year to year is something that we have been doing. And also, John, I welcome any inputs you have to answer that question as well.
Yeah, so Riley said we have annual targets, well, the annual targets that we run, and usually they are some sort of modifications. Initially, we have like a baseline. At the beginning of the project, we have a baseline, and from that, there is a predicted curve. It's like a predicted curve of what we think will happen. So it says like a baseline. But each year, based on what has been undertaken, the activities undertaken in the field by the grantees or by any of the contractors or consultant or whatever, our mail team will get more information. Based on that information, we go through the effectiveness thing, and if there's a modification, sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it can be negative, because and so on. Then we'll get a value, and that will be what we call the actual for that year. So there is usually a predicted and then an actual each time. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Jess. Yes, okay. With your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jesse. I want to ask a question about the carbon. Is it the carbon of vegetation carbon or the soil carbon? Because I missed this information. Is it the tool is for calculate the out of soil carbon or the off of carbon? And the second question is, this presentation show for us how to use the platform to get information. Like for us who work on remote sensing data, is it possible to us to get the base of how we got this platform, like the way we get the combination of the area of interest, which satellite data they use, and so on. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think the first question in terms of the above and below ground biomass, in that instance, yes, both above and below ground biomass is calculated in each of the sections. So if I go back to our carbon calculator slide, specifically within the forest protection module, I know that we have done our own, digging into the methodology and have determined that soil organic carbon is also accounted for within that accumulation of carbon. And then for the afforestation, reforestation, forest growth curves, in those instances, the sequestration of carbon is calculated for in both the growth of the root structure as well as the above ground components of the biomass. So in those instances, the tool accounts for both above and below ground biomass. And then let me see if I understood the second question correct. I know, so you mentioned the remote sensing data and wanting to be able to understand where the source of the data is that is being put into the AFOLU carbon calculator calculations. And so what I would say there is that each of the different data sets that is used is within the documentation of the tool. So what I will do is when I provide that information or that documentation after the fact, after this webinar, we will share that. I can make sure to highlight that information. In the case of, the deforestation rate, I know that that is coming from the Hansen global data set, but then also some of the other data regarding, fire occurrences and other remote sensing data sets that are used biomass. I can also get the sources for those as well. I don't know them off the top of my head, but hopefully that is helpful. And John, please, I just saw your hand go up. Please jump in.
Yeah, on the issue of maps behind the AFOLU tool, I think the map is one of some of the administrative maps that you you probably have in the GE catalog. But I think they end at level 2. If I take example, which country? Glory, if I take example of the states in Nigeria.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, you have the state, your own state, and then the next below the state, is it the local council?
Yes, local governments.
Local government. I don't think
like districts.
I don't know if you take the case of Nigeria, you go to the level of the district. But usually I think it's some of those maps that they call admin 2, level 2. So you see that it's not, now we have maps that can go to level 3. So you can go very closer to a smaller area, and the smaller you get, the more accurate you are. So the map that just had to show a larger map behind what you have, you will see he was taking Liberia, and then you have from Liberia you have I think some districts, and after that you can't get below that and things like that. If you took Côte d'Ivoire, then you go from the province, the region, and then you get to another level. You can't go beyond that. So you can see, for example, Liberia River Jesus. Okay, you probably looking at the map, you can see the administrative divisions, and it's just one of the maps that you get in the GE catalog. So I think there are more precise maps that you have now. So I don't know whether it helps for the remote sensing person.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, Phoebe.
I wanted to just add to what Gaba was talking about, because for the AFOLU sector particularly, there is the flag says from soil organic carbon, and there's also the deadwood components of carbon. So does the AFOLU calculator take account of all those 3 components, or it's just based off AGB?
Thank you, Phoebe. This is the idea.
Okay. Yeah. The above, normally the above ground biomass is above ground live biomass. The dead wood component, we need to check, but I doubt whether there's a correction for dead wood. The below ground biomass is estimated using a relation between above ground biomass and below ground biomass. For those who have been working on the greenhouse gas accounting and so on. So, but we can check. There are so many documentations on the backing the AFOLU document. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the idea. I think yesterday we follow one webinar on the how to appreciate the carbon in mangrove. I think they do the same thing in one article. I think they are one index that they use to multiply what we get in terms of biomass. But it's not index, but I think it's 0.917, something like that. We can check it and to share with those who are interested on that. So they say that the biomass not allowed, because the remote sensely the air biomass not allowed to get information under the biomass to appreciate the soil carbon, but they use this number to appreciate it.
Okay.
Over.
Yeah, I think if I'll jump in here, I think that is a similar way that the carbon calculator determines the below ground biomass, is that they're using in many cases like the allometric equations of what proportion is below ground in order to then multiply that amount by the above ground biomass value to get that. I don't think that there are maps of soil organic carbon incorporated into the tool itself. I think it's a proportional measure. But John, please.
Yeah, just a reminder, from the beginning, we saw that the tool was based on the IPCC default values initially. And since there has been a lot of progress for most of the mangroves, just talked about mangroves, they had an additional document from IPCC in 2013, which updated a lot of information on mangroves. And most recently in 2019, there was another update. So that is why we're saying that, why we actually said this document, it needs an update. I believe that ECODIT project, which is working, the project is actually a USAID project that is presently working on this AFOLU tool. I believe that we don't know what they will come up with, but I believe that they will come out with a good updated tool. If you want maybe to check, I'll try to check where they are, because this contract was given to them in 2013, and where they are with the AFOLU tool. There was a need to update this tool. USAID also saw that need. They were the ones that funded the initial AFOLU in 2014, and then they saw the need for this update. So there are a lot of things that will probably be updated. But the idea of the Google Earth engine, as you know, is the fact that this is so open source, and there are a lot of advantages, because the scripts are, for anybody who can do the Java scripting, the scripts are open, so you can actually modify the scripts the way you want, and probably for those remote sensing, GIS, programming goals, you can do many things in that area. So I believe that if you were an open source and transparent type of program like what we have on the GE tool, everybody will know what to do and will bring a lot of suggestions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, John. Thank you. I don't know if John and Shesh, there are other things to talk about. I think we're done here, right?
Yes, if everybody has had their questions answered, then we don't have any more content to present. I will note, as I said previously, we're very happy to answer other questions via email. We can put our emails in the chat. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. And I will make sure to gather, all of the documentation that I've shown, and then also make sure that the slides are available, as well as the links to the GE scripts that John has been referencing. So we'll try to gather all of that content into one email, share that with you, Gloria, and you can share that with all of the participants.
I will do just that. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for being a part